Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. This video is going to take a look at the resting dendrobiums. I'm going to have to do it in bits because they're all over the place and I'll have to move things to get at each one. So rather than filming me moving stuff that's not relevant, I'll just do them individually. But before we start, some terminology. Most of the orchids we grow, irrespective of genera, come from the tropics. So we're talking tropical forests, basically. I mean, there are some grow out in the open on rocky outcrops and things, but in the main you can relatively safely say most of them are forest dwellers. So what type of forests have we got? Well, we've got evergreen forests. The fact that they are evergreen, you can almost across the board say, well, they're going to get a wet season and a drier season. Yeah, they have a rainy season and a season where it doesn't rain so much. In some cases hardly at all. But the conditions don't change severely enough for those leaf trees to dump their leaves. These are evergreen forests. Yeah, and some of our dendrobiums come from there. An awful lot of other stuff does as well. Unless they're right up in the treetops, they're going to get at best dappled light, and in some cases lower light levels. They have a tree canopy above them. Right, then we move on to another type of forest, and we do get some dendrobiums in there, along with quite a few other things, and that's the montane forests. Now, in the main, these are also evergreen. The difference is they're at higher elevations, they're constantly shrouded in mist and fog. And if you've got orchids that come from this region, you need to know the sort of temperature, because a lot of them are going to be cooler growing, yeah? And their conditions are such that they get lower light levels, they're shrouded in mist and fog, yeah? And they're constantly moist in very high humidity. That's a special case. The next type of forest, deciduous forests. And in there you will find some orchids. And you'll find a fair old few dendrobiums in there. Those are the ones that need the winter rest, the proper thing. They come from a forest where the conditions are harsh enough for the trees to dump their leaves, like they do here in the UK, except for conifers. Yeah? So that's where we're getting at. And you will find that most of those dendrobiums that come from the deciduous forests, they dump their leaves too. They can be classed as mainly annually deciduous. They grow like hell in the growing season, rainy season, when they've got leaf cover, so they don't need so much light during their growing season. And then in the autumn, you get leaf fall, and it gets cooler, and the rains virtually stop. They still get some moisture, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying don't water your flipping plants all winter. They would still get morning dew and mist and fog now and again, you know, as temperatures change. So they're not totally bone dry. But they do get harsher conditions. But the main thing to remember with resting dendrobiums, those conditions imply much, much greater light. Yeah? The leaf cover's gone. If the sun comes out, they're in it. Yeah, so much higher light levels and not much feed at all, if any, and far less watering. But the thing to remember is the temperatures will be lower. If the temperatures didn't drop down, the trees wouldn't dump their leaves. Yeah, so they're gonna get quite a lot cooler and drier, and the most important thing is the most light you can actually give them. That's what they would get. So when we talk about true resting dendrobiums, in the main, they are annually deciduous, and if you don't give them that really high light level and a bit of a chill down from their growing season, they probably either won't bloom or won't bloom very well. So that's where we're coming from. And that's the ones I'd like to look at today. So I'll get each one down, having shuffled in between, and we'll have a quick look and see how they're doing. Right, the first one is Dendrobium loddigesii, or loddigesii if you want to say it like that. Now again, these are the new growths, yeah? This is the previous growing season's growths. they are dropping leaves. Slowly but surely they're going yellow and falling off. Now if you didn't know that, that might set off a panic, yeah? But the giveaway is the previous year's growths, which in the main have got no leaves, yeah? Annually deciduous. By the end of the winter, as the new growth and hopefully some blooms start get going nearer spring, most of these leaves will be gone. It might hang on to a couple, but most will be gone. This stopped growing quite a long time ago. So that's what it looks like. And last time I looked at these was the 5th of December. They haven't been touched since then. Yeah? So my decision now is, are these canes desiccating? Now, that's not always easy to tell, but it sort of is for me because I've got some older canes, yeah, that haven't done much for a year. Yeah? So what are the newer ones like? They're still quite plump. Not showing wrinkles all down the sides. Now, because I haven't touched it for quite a while, that's going to get the tiniest amount of water. Now, I can't hold the camera and show you at the same time, but I can explain. You've got a pad of moss in there, which it's planted on. And all round the edge of that moss is an extension of roots that are just on the bark with no moss. That's where the water will be put. So I will just trickle some water over the bare part of the mount, keeping that moss dry. Because if I get the moss wet, it's going to stay wet for quite a while. It's cool in here, it's winter time. You know, you haven't got the massive fans going and all that sort of stuff. So that's going to get a little tiny trickle of water before I put it back. And it will be a very small amount. So that's that one. It grew well last year, and it's coming on nicely, and established a hell of a root system, so it should take off like a little rocket when the weather gets better. Nice little plant, and hopefully we get some reasonable blooms on that this time round. Now this is Dendrobium Jenkins CI, and I love it when there's an exception, because although this needs a good winter rest, good chill down, really bright light and a great reduction in watering, otherwise it just won't bloom at all or not very well. But is it annually deciduous? No. That's what I said, I love it when there's an exception. This does eventually drop its leaves, but this one holds on to its leaves quite a while. Next year it's going to be up the back of the mount. It's probably grown 30 new growths this year. It's pushed on at a hell of a rate. And another exception are my pseudobulbs, or canes. They are stumpy little canes really, as it's a dendrobium. Are they shrivelling? And the answer is yes, because they always do. I love it when there's an exception. So if you sort of had one of these and it grew these nice big plump canes during your growing season, and now they look like that, you might start chucking loads of water at it. They always do that. They do it naturally. They naturally shrivel down to look like wrinkled plums or wrinkled prunes or wrinkled grapes, whatever you want to call it, but that's their natural look. So again, this one's going to get the tiniest of trickle, which is quite difficult because it's sat on a large pad of moss, but there are some little areas like in there where I can just pour a little bit of water, and on the base of the mount where the roots have extended underneath the mount, I can get some little bit of water there, and on that extension out the side there's no moss under there, so I can just get a little tiny bit of water on it, no feed, and that will just keep it ticking over till next time I get round to looking at it, but no rush. So that's an exception. Not annually deciduous, but won't bloom very well if you don't chill it down a bit and give it some bright light. And as you've chilled it down a bit and there are no new growths and no growth activity whatsoever, it doesn't need the water and the feed. So, you know, it's just trying to apply a bit of logic sometimes. It's not complicated. That's that one. I'm filming this one now for a very good reason, because I've changed the concept with Dendrobium Cinelli. I used to believe this was a proper winter resting type dendrobium. I no longer do. And I've had this long enough to see why. It's pushing out new growths in several places, and there is root activity. And I don't want to stall those new growths. So I'm just classing this one as drier in winter, not a full winter rest. Yeah, so this one gets looked at more often, literally because it's growing. You know, if I stop watering that and don't give it any feed at all for 2 or 3 months, I'll stall those new growths, if not lose them altogether. So I'm just keeping it ticking over. It gets bright light. Obviously everything gets chilled down in here in the winter, but this one still gets a little bit of help to keep those new growths going. So I don't actually class that one as a full winter rest anymore. I used to, and it actually cost me my first one. It dried out in the winter and died. So I keep this one just ticking over. Hopefully we'll get some blooms on that. It does become deciduous, where the canes look like hairy tarantula legs. And this is going to lose some more of the leaves on these fully mature canes as winter progresses. I doubt if it'll lose all of them, and it certainly won't be losing its leaves on the newer growths, the ones that started halfway through the season, and the ones that have started at the end of the season. So it's like a rolling deciduous plant. It does drop its leaves eventually, but not a distinct annual sort of phase. A different one. Strange one, this one. It's classed as quite difficult to grow, this one. I sort of understand why, but irrespective of whether it's classed as difficult to grow, I do know from quite a lot of others that have given up on this that they think it's an incredibly difficult one to get to bloom, irrespective of whether they can keep it alive or not. So this one is, there's quite a lot of people think this one's a bit awkward and not quite your run-of-the-mill. Anyway, I like it. It's a nice plant. Now, this is the problem with some of the winter resters. They're also pretty big plants. They are difficult to film and get the whole plant in. This is Dendrobium findlayanum, original plant that I bought, long since lost its leaves. Areas of the plant that bloomed last year around here, just sort of dropping off their last few leaves now. And so I wanted to show these leaves just to show that if I touch them they fall off. You know, they're in that phase of actually dropping at the moment. I always take them off because if I don't, they fall on other plants and sit in a pot or in leaf crowns and things. So, but anyway, this one has grown some very long canes this year, so there's a good amount of new growth on it. These leaves may not completely drop this winter, some of them will. And if you look at the older canes, there's some slight desiccation there. Yeah, but if you look at this year's canes, which is where I hope most of the blooms are going to come from, they're not desiccated in any shape or form. And as I said, that hasn't even been looked at since the 5th of December. Not even glanced over. And it's not going to get watered now. Even though I have looked at it, so it can wait till next time now. The new growths are not shriveling. The old growths are showing signs of age, nothing more. Yeah? So at best, I would just trickle a little bit of water. Again, where have I got some bare roots? There's a few up the top. Yeah? But this one was difficult to hydrate in the summer, so I added quite a lot of moss. I could take that moss off now for the winter, but then I'll have to put some back in the spring. This one takes so much flipping water, it needs something to hold the water in the growing season. So this one's got a bit more moss than some of the others. But I could find a place to trickle a little bit of water if I chose to do so. But I have to go very, very careful watering this one because there is quite a high volume of moss. And once you get it wet and it's cool like it is now, it stays wet for a while, which is not what I want. I just wanted to give it just a tease of some water. But not this time. It's going to get missed out. Wait till next time. We'll see how that one does. Right. This one is Dendrobium The Fillin. This was a gift from Alberto in Italy. And effectively what he sent me was this, which in fact was a kiki off of his large plant. Yeah, yes, a 2-foot long kiki basically. I'm not sure I've got a feeling that it had a kiki and I took it off and planted it at the base. I think that's what that little bit is. But it grew one new growth in the growing season, which is this one, which is up to the length of the other cane. It's doing autumn at the moment, in the middle of winter. Yeah, it's dropping its leaves slowly but surely. Doesn't do them all at once. But I have seen some dendrobiums do what I call a leaf dump. Yeah, they start turning a little bit yellow. And you know, perhaps you don't visit your orchids every day, and next time you come back all the leaves are on the floor. It can be quite worrying. And I would be a trifle worried if it dumped every leaf in a very, very short space of time, because that's not how they normally work. It's an ongoing thing. So that particular cane, the one I'm looking at, because it bloomed on the kiki, so I don't expect it to bloom there again. But on this season's growth, that's where the buds should come. So that's the cane I don't want to desiccate. And it isn't. So, nothing for you, mate. Wait till next time. You're doing your natural thing. So that's that one. Sorry, you're going to have to excuse the backdrop. But because of the way I've rearranged things for where the lights are, I haven't got my normal rack in the middle of this roof that I can hang large plants off of and film. So I'm hanging them off the fan today. So there's obviously not an ideal backdrop. This is Dendrobium primulinum, I believe, from memory. Yep, primulinum. It's another one of those that, depending on where you read, it's often called something else. An air of confusion. I'm not going to say it's a problem as such, but this one's doing its thing, you know, gradually dropping its leaves slowly but surely. Now this plant I nearly lost. The winter before last, I took my so-called resting dendrobiums up into the spare bedroom where it was nice and cool, but what I didn't appreciate was humidity of practically zero. They got the good light, they got the cooler temperatures, but without the humidity they didn't get their natural environment, and this one nearly died. It was very, very close. I had to pull it out of its rest basically, because it was going downhill very, very fast, quite honestly. It was getting in a hell of a state. Anyway, we brought it back to life, and this year it's put on these two good canes here, which are now losing their leaves, and another shorter one back here. So we've got some growths to get some blooms on this time round. No sign of any buds yet on these canes. I don't expect them yet. You've got some of the resting type dendrobiums bloom early. You know, they're not even out of winter yet and they can start producing their buds. But quite a few of them take quite a long time to get the blooms to open from the point you see the nubbins starting to grow. Yeah, so it's not like an overnight success sort of thing. Just because the nubbins start appearing, it can be quite a while before the blooms are ready to open. But anyway, we should see some signs of some bulges coming soon, I suspect, but not yet. It's a little too early yet. It's more likely to be out towards the end of January. But this one grew well this year. It's okay. These latest growths are not shriveling in any shape or form, so I don't need to worry about that one at the moment. They've both finished growing a while ago. So again, if I was to water this, which I'm not going to today, I've got a moss pad in the middle, but if you can see, parts of the mount have got roots on where there's no moss. That's the bits I would water. Just those extremities where the roots are outside of the moss. Because this is cork bark, it's going to dry pretty quick, irrespective of the temperatures, because it doesn't really hold any water. So that one's in a nice state to be able to give a trickle, should I choose to do so, which is not today. Canes are still nice and plump. Slowly losing its leaves. They'll be bald by the end of the winter, I suspect. And hopefully the new growths will come out at the proper time. They were a little late, sort of earlier this year. They started a little later than I thought. But then we had the beast from the east, didn't we? We had a lousy spring. It was freezing with snow and everything. And I'm not spending a fortune artificially creating a spring in the grow room via a heater. So I wait for the weather to do it. and it was late, so the new growth started late. So that you know, puts a little delay in there. So anyway, coming on. Now this is Dendrobium Friedricksianum. It's becoming a bit of a beast. It produced a massive amount of new growth this year. It's almost doubled in size. You can see the difference between, this is an old cane and it's still got some leaves, but it's dropped most of them. It's just got a few at the end. And again on this one, a few leaves, oops, there goes one on the floor and another one. So they are dropping, and I suspect by the end of the winter most of these older canes will in fact be leafless. But on this one, as you can see, that's not this season's growth, that's the previous season's growth, and it's only starting to lose its leaves now. So it's got a 2-year cycle, which makes me wonder whether it is a truly annually deciduous one, because it's not behaving right. So I'm adjusting the behaviour slightly as from now, as from today, yeah? But if you look at this latest set of growths up here, is there any sign of desiccation on those canes? Is there hell? Those are as big and fat and plump as you could ever want to hope for something that hasn't seen any water for at least 3 weeks. Yeah, so I'm still withholding water on this because it's not showing signs of struggling the way it's being treated. But my thinking with it is, it possibly comes from a forested area that does get a little bit more of winter rain than perhaps some of the other areas. A lot of it depends on elevation, you know, all things like that. But it's getting treated as a winter rester, even though it's not annually deciduous, because back earlier this year was the first time I got this flipping thing to bloom, and it bloomed pretty well. So last winter was the first time I did a proper winter rest, and I think I finally got my head round it, and this one performed well. So why would I change its treatment this winter? That would be a little silly, wouldn't it? Yeah, so it's getting a winter rest, even though it's not annually deciduous, because it seems to make it bloom well. But it's getting a bit of a beast, this one. And wouldn't it be great if this one was in full flood for our 60th anniversary at the end of March? That would walk it. I'll do what I can, but no sign of any nubbins yet. But nice big fat, you know, canes. Very pleased. This is another biggie. Well, long. It takes up a lot of dangly space rather than width, if you see what I mean. So these for me are quite easy to accommodate. You know, get them up on the roof and just give them some clearance below and they'll just hang down. So they might be big, but they don't take up certain types of room. This one is currently, to all intents and purposes, if you didn't know any better, dying. And it's not. It's doing exactly what it should be. This is Dendrobium Nester, and it's an anosmum cross. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do, which is being annually deciduous. Now these leaves haven't long turned yellow. You can see they're not coming off. They're still hanging on there. They will go a little brownier before they actually drop. Now this one didn't perform as well this year as it did the year before, because I only got 2 new canes. Last growing season I got 3. But this year's canes are longer, but I only got 2. In theory, it'll still be the same number of blooms because the canes are a lot longer, and this one blooms almost along the entirety. If you have a look at some of the older canes, it started blooming from here right down to the end, and again round there. This big cane out the back here, that's the one that was on it when I first got it. I've never managed to equal one as long as that, but then, you know, it was probably grown in near perfect conditions with automation to keep it watered and fed and all that sort of stuff, and growth hormones like they do. But anyway, I'm pleased with the 2 canes I got. No sign of desiccation, nice big fat plump leaves, truly annually deciduous, not even a hint of water going on that. I'm not even going to think about it till next time round. And it still might not get any, depends what it's up to. So look and observe for each one, but that's an anosmum cross. Beautiful, deep purple blooms, incredibly fragrant. It smells of freshly picked squashed raspberries. It's gorgeous. But they don't last long. You're lucky to get 4 weeks out of them. But it tends to be a bit of a, showstopper when it does it. So we'll look forward to that. It's never failed since I bought it. It's bloomed well every single year. That took a first at the Bournemouth Orchid Society. Not the spring of this year, the spring before. Anyway, coming on well, or not as the case may be, but it's doing its thing. Leaves are yellowing. They will fall over the next 3 or 4 weeks or so, and probably the rest of the green ones will turn yellow. Usually the last ones to go on these type are the terminal leaves, the last 2 on the cane. They seem to hang on the longest. But anyway, it's well on its way to dropping its leaves now. No signs of desiccation. That are good. And the last one, hang on, I don't think I can't get this in unless I stand in the Vander bucket. That's about as far away as I can get. This is Dendrobium Osman, so this is actually the species. And quite honestly, the UK is not the best place in the world to try and grow these. Are truly annually deciduous. It's doing it now. Some of these may fall off. Yeah, these are getting to the... Not quite. No, they're still hanging on there. They're starting to loosen. They'll be off soon. And when I got this plant, it wasn't the best. It wasn't in the best state. It looked like it had been ripped off a tree to me. All of its roots had been chopped off about 1.5 inches long, so it had no viable growing roots on the plant. And I managed to get it to grow a new cane last year. And it did bloom successfully, and I was hoping for more this year, but what actually happened was it put up a short cane in the wrong season, basically, so it didn't develop. But then during the growing season it did this, and that's a good long cane. It's as long as anything that plant's ever had before, so I'm pleased with that. What I'm hoping for this time round is more than one new growth. It's got a hell of a root system up there now that's developed over this year. It's got its strength in that base now. Hopefully it should be able to push up several new growths. And if you think about what you're doing and the rate of growth on some of your orchids, that's got to get from there to there in one growing season. And it's a shorter growing season in the UK than you would get in other parts of the world. But what I have just noticed is the nubbins are just starting to form on this one. Yeah. So out of all the winter resters, this is probably going to be the first to bloom. I'm not betting on it. I'm not taking odds or anything like that, but the signs are there already. But the nubbins are quite slow to develop on anosmum, or they are here in my environment anyway. But I'm pleased with the one new cane it grew, and if it's going to bloom from, well, that's the highest one I can see at the moment, or it looks like there might be one there, possibly even here. We'll see, but it's going to start blooming from about there. And if you look at the previous cane, it bloomed right down to the end of the cane. So last time it bloomed from here, where the stubs are, down to there. This time it looks like it might well bloom from up here somewhere. Probably down to the end of the cane. And again, beautiful blooms, and it's got that same freshly picked squashed raspberries is my... and I'm not very good at fragrances, but I can pretty safely say that description is spot on. Squashed, freshly picked raspberries. Not as dark as Nestor, but still a good colour. Pretty large blooms in clusters, so each nubbin isn't a bloom, it's a cluster of blooms. But again, 3 to 4 weeks, a bit short-lived. So anyway, believe it or not, everybody knows just how many dendrobiums I've got. Those are the only true winter resters. And the Cinelli isn't really in that category. It's half in it and half out. So, those are the true winter resters, the annually deciduous. And they go with the trees. If the trees dump their leaves, the orchids have evolved to follow that pattern. Not going to get much food because it's not raining hardly at all. They would get moisture in the air, and the odd little shower I suppose, but not much. And it cools right down and the light level increases dramatically. So that's what effectively we're trying to replicate when we say a full winter rest. Now I'm going to go back to my introduction. Can you see the difference between a full winter rest and the expression drier in winter? Because I can use the expression drier in winter for nearly every orchid in here, except for my Deisas, Oncidium types, Cattleya types. If they come from a place that has a wet, dry season, only 2 seasons, one of them's chucking it down all the time, and the other one it isn't, then they are drier in winter. Not dry, drier. And especially in the UK, in here, when the temperatures have dropped right down. I mean, okay, I've got grow lights, I'm hoping my extended day lengths won't have slowed them down so much, but if your temperatures drop down and your day lengths shorten, your plants are going to slow up. You know, and if they're going to slow up, they won't need as much water and feed because they're not growing so much. So drier in winter. You can apply that to many of your orchids. Different if you're growing in the home, because you probably don't get the drops in temperature, and you start putting your heating on, your air's a bit drier. That's a different ball game. You might even need to water and feed more in your winter. But yeah, it's all geared up to where and how you grow. So that's my resting dendrobiums and their progress so far. Most of the progress is geared up to not getting desiccated canes and progressively dumping their leaves on the floor. And that's how they work in the winter. But we did see some exceptions like the Jenkins CI that doesn't dump its leaves for quite a few years. Holds on to them. Lovely leathery, almost Cattleya-like leaves. You know, very leathery, thick, chunky things. And it holds on to them. Anyway, that's a look to see how they're going. I think at least one of those is a project plant, so we'll see that a bit more often. But that'll be the last look at these until we start getting some changes now, which will be nubbins starting to push away from the canes, which means there is growth. Where there is growth, there is a need to increase water and reintroduce feeding. It doesn't matter whether it's new growth at the base or buds. It's growth. As soon as they come back into growth, you need to start thinking about pushing those growths. Yeah? You might see the difference between if you withheld your water and your feed. As these nubbins progress, you might only get 1 or 2 blooms instead of 3 or 4. Yeah? Anyway, that's as far as I can go today. That's that lot done. A couple got a trickle of water, but not many. So we'll revisit those probably around end of January, something like that. Thanks for dropping by. See you next time.